Hello, everyone. My name is Romoita, and we are back for the second keynote of this amazing online event. With me, we have Dr. Noah Sobe, who is Senior Project Officer in the Future of Learning and Innovation team at UNESCO, where he helps to lead the Futures of Education initiative. Before getting into the topic, I just want to remind our audience that you can ask questions at any time to our guests through the Facebook and YouTube stream. So, as many of you know, UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, is responsible for several international projects with a very big impact in society, many of which you might have heard about. Dr. Noah is a professor of cultural and educational policy studies at the Loyola University Chicago, but he has been dedicated to the Futures of Education initiative for the past year. Beth is also collaborating with UNESCO, promoting and carrying some activities to gather students' opinions about the future of education, since we all believe that this initiative can bring a positive impact to education worldwide. To tell us more about this initiative, I'd like to welcome Dr. Noah Solveig for the presentation.
Thanks very much for that introduction. I've got a couple of slides that I'm going to share. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. What I'm going to do is present this UNESCO project, and then I'm going to invite your ideas, your contributions, and your involvement. And I'll give some examples of ways you can get involved, one coming up in just a second. So as John mentioned in the introduction, UNESCO is the UN's lead agency on education. And we lead in the implementation of SDG 4, the Sustainable Development Goal related to education. We're also now leading a global coalition to respond to the COVID-19 disruptions in education. I will be talking more about that in a little bit. That's getting ahead of things. UNESCO, though, is also an important laboratory of ideas. It's a place that tries to bring diverse perspectives from around the world together to design solutions to problems of today and tomorrow. What I'm going to talk about today is an initiative that was launched in September 2019. It's a global initiative to reimagine how knowledge and learning can shape the future of humanity and the planet. We want to think about the challenges that are ahead, but also the opportunities. And we want to think in particular about the role that education can play in this. Now, we have set up a survey specifically for this event. And in the live stream, they'll be inserting a link. If you are watching this recording, you can still go to the same link and offer your input. It would be very useful if you could do that at some point in the next 5 or 10 minutes, because at the end of the session, we want to pull up the results and see what people in this particular crowd have had to say about the major challenges, opportunities, and the role that education can play in the future. So please go and complete the survey if you can. The aim of the project is to activate a debate and action on the futures of education, knowledge, and learning. And one specific goal, milestone, will be a global report that comes out in November of 2021. It's going to provide an agenda for policy dialogue and action at multiple levels. But I think an important feature of what UNESCO is doing here is that policy dialogue and action is already well underway. And I'm going to invite you to contribute more to it. Let me offer just a tiny bit of history here to put this initiative in a broader context. This kind of white paper study is something that UNESCO has done at regular moments across time. What we're doing now builds on this humanistic approach to education that was laid out in previous UNESCO work. One of those reports was from the early 70s, titled Learning to Be. And that report already warned of the risks of inequality and emphasized the need for a continued expansion of education and lifelong learning. This was followed in the late 1990s by a report put together under the leadership of Jacques Delors called Learning the Treasure Within, that proposed an integrated vision of education that cohered around 4 pillars: learning to be, learning to know, learning to do, and learning to live together. More recently, UNESCO has continued this role of global intellectual leadership with work thinking about education as a global common good, and how we reframe the purpose of education as enhancing and sustaining the dignity and capacity of the human person in relation to others and to nature. Now, you've noted on the slide, I think, that the context for the current initiative, 25 years later, is that we have an increasing awareness that our world is complex, uncertain, and fragile. And of course, coronavirus has underscored each of those points, as I'll talk about in a second. But one of the important features of this project is that as the world is changing, we recognize that education needs to change. But education shouldn't simply be reactive to a changing world, but education should be one of the forces that causes change in the world. The project is advanced on several tracks. One of them involves an international commission that is chaired by Her Excellency Sahle-Work Zewde, who is the president of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. She's the chair of an international commission that is composed of thought leaders from a range of areas, education, from academia, from civil society, the world of business and politics. And I think what is a bit different about this particular report is the process in which it's being developed. It's going to emerge from a much inclusive process of consultation, debate, and research engagement than perhaps we've had in past editions of this exercise. I have here on the quote on the slide a quote from Her Excellency Ms. Sahle-Work Zewde that I think is very revealing of some of the core philosophy and spirit of the present initiative. She put forth the idea that no longer do we allow the planet, the future of the planet, to be determined from one location, and she calls for futures to be democratically and locally envisioned and made. And the key point I would direct your attention to is this use of futures in the plural, which is an important part of this initiative. It is both to pragmatically recognize that there will be multiple futures of education. It's to recognize that too often the pursuit for a single future has led to future being imposed upon people as opposed to democratically chosen. And it also highlights, beyond the pragmatic fact that there are multiple futures of education, the simple reality, beyond the reality that is desirable, that there will be a diversity in the range of ways that education is set up as it serves around the globe. So the commission itself will carefully consider the inputs that are received through this process of consultation. We intend to be very broad and open to involve youth, teachers, educators of all stripes, the non-governmental sector, governments, business, other stakeholders. The global consultation process includes the survey that I have just suggested and asked you all to take. And if Mike put the link again in the chat, I would appreciate it. So anyone joining now can go to that survey and complete it. At the end, all things, assuming everything works okay, we'll show the results for those of you who are gathered during this particular online session. We also have a series of online platforms that involve people to submit their ideas in writing, also to submit artwork, and then we have several debating platforms that raise particular ideas. And we also encourage focus group discussions, of which this is a form. So the reason for this particular session right now is not just so that I can tell you about this event, but that so I can invite you to engage and contribute ideas, because the International Commission is committed to having this be a broad, participatory, partnership-oriented, and co-creation process. It's interesting. I mentioned that the project was launched in December of 2019, and fortunately, it seems that UNESCO was prescient, was a bit ahead of things to realize that some serious reflection on the future was needed, because arguably, since the arrival of COVID and all the disruptions, the need for kind of careful reflection has become even stronger. So one of the questions that we've engaged with is whether the future has arrived before we were ready for it. And it seems to many that the possibilities of change have really become evident. We have seen in daily life around the planet that things can be radically different than they were before. Previously in the project, we had to place a strong emphasis on the time horizon of 2050 and beyond. And the goal was to activate people's thinking in a way that took them outside of what is expected and normal and got them into a world of possibility and alternatives. I think one of the, if we can say that the tragedy of coronavirus has any useful features, one of them is that it has opened, I think, many of our eyes to the possibilities of thinking that the world can be radically different and can be changed. Clearly, we will move at some point out of a crisis mode, but it's not clear that the new normal will be the same as the old normal. And in fact, one of the questions that I would challenge you all to think about is how we can ensure that the new normal is a more sustainable, more desirable, a normal that encourages human flourishing more. I think that we also learned an important lesson of the future itself from COVID that is intrinsically unknowable. And in some ways, we received an object lesson in how to cope with uncertainty, which is not by striving for control or better forecasting methods, but instead by developing resilience, wisdom, creativity, inclusion, diversity, all those other features of human living and human societies that help us adapt to a changing world. And of course, not just adapt to, but shape a changing world for the better. We've also in the project spent a lot of time thinking about what we can learn from the educational disruptions connected with COVID. I would encourage you to offer your thoughts on this. I'm just going to pull out several that I think particularly salient. especially as we are at a moment now where history is being written, where we have the possibility of making decisions in the short term that will have significant impacts in the future. So one of the things that has been quite clear from the educational disruptions connected with COVID are the severity of inequalities around the world, and not just between well-resourced parts of the world and less well-resourced parts of the world, but even within some of the wealthiest places on this planet. We have just received a sobering reminder about how deep inequalities are in our societies. We've also learned about the importance of learning that happens in homes and communities. We've also learned about the importance of classrooms and school spaces. By their absence for many people, we've gotten insights into just how many important things happen in school in addition to academic learning. We've also learned some of the pros of technology, but also some of the limitations of technology. And in fact, one of the interesting parts of this story is how resilient forms of technology in education, such as radio and television, have been alongside of internet and digital devices. I want to go on to just quickly review 4 areas of ongoing work because I want to present them to you and invite you to join in the design and engineering of solutions, of trying to figure out how we can address these issues and what actions need to be taken. One relates to human and planetary sustainability. We clearly have to take a collective and collaborative approach to fostering sustainable life on this planet, and education has a key role to play in this. We have to find ways to channel human capability in directions that improve the quality of human life while also respecting our supporting ecosystems. So the challenge and the question I put to you is, how can we structure education so that creativity, imagination, but also the social resolve that leads to action can be unleashed? Second critical topic that I think we need to address relates to knowledge, which the International Commission has developed a whole set of ideas around the importance of viewing knowledge as a global common good, as something that is made by all, available by all. And so we need to direct attention at the role that education can play in ensuring that knowledge becomes a global common good that benefits humanity and benefits the planet. Third, there are a lot of important questions about citizenship and participation that have been driven home by COVID crisis, but also by the mobilization around the importance of the Black Lives Matter movement. So the question here is, how do we design education and learning so that we can support civic participation, so that we can support freedom of thought and human rights? And in some of these instances, it may be a question of how we redesign education. Finally, clearly, we need to think about the ways that education connects to work and economic security. Again, not to be simply responsive to changes in the world of work, although that's clearly needed, but also through education to drive changes in the world of work. So the question I put to you is, how do we design education so that we can ensure the human-centeredness of the future work? All right, before we go to questions from the audience, I just want to return to this final slide because I want to raise the question that I opened up earlier about what we've learned about complexity, uncertainty, and fragility with COVID. Because surely COVID has shown us that our world is complex. In fact, the difficulties of that complexity have become front and center for many of us. But I think at the same time, we've all seen that the complexity of the world generates a kind of dynamism. It generates multiple possibilities that have real promise. We've certainly, in the last couple months, seen the overwhelming challenges that come with a world that's increasingly uncertain. But again, I think that uncertainty has also shown that there are great potentials in our world, and times in places where we least expect them. If anything, uncertainty puts lie to the idea of determinism. Finally, fragility. We have seen really terrifying risks and vulnerabilities in the world. But at the same time, fragility generates an awareness, a kind of sensitivity to our interdependencies, and can actually be a wellspring for hope. So I will close this part of the presentation with that idea of hope. History is being written at great speed. We cannot afford to be pessimistic. And the futures of education is going to need us learning to become something we have not yet become. So, John, back over to you for questions.
Thank you very much. So just a reminder that you have now in the comment section, both in the Facebook stream and the YouTube stream, some links. One of them is the survey that Dr. Noah mentioned before. It's a very short survey that you can fill right away. And we are moving on to the questions, since we also don't have that much time left. And I'm going to start with one question that came in our Slido app. So, Mr. Noah, is technology an enabler of more inclusive education worldwide? How can we ensure that less privileged communities have access to it?
Yeah, I mean, given the audience that I'm talking to, I want to turn that question on you because that's what we need you all to do, is to make sure that technology is is in service of those who have the least access. My one suggestion, and again, I differ because you guys are the experts. My one suggestion is that our design criteria begin with the principle of serving those who are least advantaged, right? That I think is probably the best route to ensuring that technology does a better job of addressing inequality as opposed to exacerbating inequality. And unfortunately, we've all seen the ways that technology can worsen inequalities. Back to you.
Thank you very much. And one more question. How long do you think it will take to fully restore the usual way of education? And will it ever happen? So I guess related to this COVID-19 crisis.
It's a good question. And we clearly will return to some form of normalcy. And I do not think there is any possible way it will be the old normal. But the question before us is, what normal will it be? We do know that the COVID disruptions are going to continue well beyond the closure and reopening of schools around the globe. We know that the economic consequences, economic recessions globally are going to impact our societies and our schooling systems, perhaps for many years. We also, I think, are seeing globally a kind of political impact of COVID as well, and that's going to impact our society for many years. But I think already now we can start doing things to make the future we want. There's no reason to wait.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Noah. We are not going to get to more questions since our next keynote is starting in 5 minutes. So I just want to thank very much UNESCO for this initiative and for being here, for Professor Noah for taking his time to share with us his insights and what the Futures of Education initiative is doing. I hope that a lot of you students at home take the time to fill in this survey, also check further the work that UNESCO has been doing on this topic. And I hope that this will lead to better education in the future. Mr. Noah, you had something to?
Yeah, and just an encouragement to fill in the survey. Please let me share the survey results that we have to date to the minute. We only have about under 50 people who took the survey so far. We're hoping that more will add to it. But among this particular group, it's interesting to see climate change, environmental crises, and economic inequalities at the top of the list. And then in terms of what education should do to address these, there seems to be clear agreement that sustainability coupled with scientific innovation and active citizenship are some of our key strategies. So let's work together on this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Noah. And we'll be back in 5 minutes for the next keynote from Alfredo Soeiro from the University of Porto, who will talk about online assessment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.